Sponsored in part by Pediatric Associates of Dallas. Pediatric Associates of Dallas has been providing excellence in pediatric medicine since 1971. PAD has locations in Dallas and Plano and is now open 7 days a week because taking care of kids is what we do.
The following content is not intended as a substitute for professional legal advice, medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your attorney, advocate, physician, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding any medical or educational concerns.
Good morning, and welcome to Empower Dyslexia Podcast. I'm Stephen Yearout.
And I'm Rachel Chambers.
What a great morning it is. On this show, we discuss dyslexia and other related disorders and researched intervention that is out there in the marketplace. We also talk about educational policy at the state and local and even federal level. We also talk to experts in the field concerning whatever related disorder, whether it's dyslexia or any other. We also talk to parents and other people with personal stories surrounding these issues. Every week, we tell you where you can listen to us and find us. You can find us on, of course, Facebook Live, YouTube Live. But you can find us on all of our favorite apps that we get our podcasts on: iTunes, Google Play, Alexa, Spotify, Stitcher, any tune in. We're there. Go out, find us, like us, subscribe, leave us a comment.
Yes, please.
We want to make sure that we bring the most relevant information to the parents to help them be that better informed partner in education each week.
Yes. That's our goal. So today we have a huge show for you today. We're going to be talking about Texas, of course, but we're doing the 2019 wrap-up of Texas's legislative session in regards to dyslexia. So I'm really excited because they did a lot this year.
Huge changes.
And so, yeah, I feel like we're headed in the right direction. I mean,
absolutely.
Fingers crossed. I mean, it's a step in the right direction. So joining us, so Stephen and I went to Washington, D.C. last week to the Say Dyslexia rally. We were asked to speak, and which we did, which was really
a great
experience. And I was very humbled to even be asked, and we got to meet a lot of neat people, one of which was NHL hockey player,
Stanley Cup winner,
Brett Sopel. And he is a known dyslexic, and he has his own foundation. It's called the Brett Sopel Foundation. Ziggy, do we have that still? Where we could just show his web. Yeah, there it is. There's his webpage.
So you can see there his mission is to help people with dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
He's a great guy. We're actually going to have him on our show, but we wanted to make sure we gave him a shout out.
Yeah. And he gave us these bracelets.
Beautiful little bracelets
that are,
support his
foundation. So he was really fun. We met a lot of other great individuals too, but we just wanted to give a shout out to Brent real quick, and say thank you.
Thank you.
So, okay, so back to today's show. So today we have in the studio Texas House of Representatives Speaker of the House, Dennis Bonnen, and we are so excited to have him on the show. Let me tell you just a little bit about Dennis. I feel weird calling him by his first name, but that's what he said. But Speaker Bonnen. So he, okay, I'm just going to read this, y'all, so bear with me. So Speaker of the House, Texas House, Dennis Bonnen, District 25. He's the Honorable Dennis Bonnen, and he was unanimously elected Speaker of the House of Representatives on January 8th, 2019. Speaker Bonnen has served in the House of Representatives for over 20 years, representing southern Brazoria County and the entirety of Matagorda County. Prior to his election as Speaker, Bonnen served as Speaker Pro Tem beginning in 2013. He has previously served as Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, as a member of House Culture, Recreation, and Tourism Committee, Chairman of the Sunset Advisory Committee, and the House Special Purpose Districts Committee, Vice Chairman of the Joint Committee of Oversight of Higher Education Governance, Excellence, and Transparency, and as a member of the Natural Resources Committee. Speaker Bonnen resides with his wife, Kim, and their 2 sons in Lake Jackson, Texas. In addition to his legislative duties, he is the CEO and Chairman of the Board of Heritage Bank. So, Speaker Bonnen, are you with us today?
Yes, I am here.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So after hearing that bio, do you need anything else to add to your plate for things to do? Sounds like you're all over the place.
It's always a little embarrassing, frankly.
You've done a lot. I mean, how great is that?
Sort of.
It's amazing and awesome to that you've been on all of those committees and you've done so much. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
So for our viewers, can you tell us a little bit about yourself personally?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Angleton, Texas, a small town just south of Houston. We're about 40 miles south of Houston. And I'm the youngest of 4 children. And that's significant because my 3 older siblings are incredibly academically inclined and all excelled academically. And I joke that if you take where they graduated in their high school classes, add it up and multiply it by a pretty good sized number, you get where I landed. But what had occurred is that when I was in kindergarten, the kindergarten teachers told my mother that I was just kind of a slower student and that the other kids were really bright and she should just be happy that she has 3 really smart kids and one who's, a little slower than the others. Ouch. And that actually angered her, which is a blessing for me. So she took me to Texas Children's in Houston to be tested. And there they diagnosed me with dyslexia, being dyslexic. And so I'm very much kind of the charmed life of a dyslexic in that I was an early diagnosis. My mother was not willing to put up for anything less than the best support that she could give me. And my father, of course, was always supportive. And so I went through the public schools in Angleton, except for 2 years. In 5th grade, my mother and father drove me to Houston every day and back to go to a small private school, Red Reading Center, that specialized with dyslexic students. All that were in the room were dyslexic kids. And then in 6th grade, I went to a school in the neighboring community of Lake Jackson Public School because they had the alphabetic phonics program. And so I would be pulled out once during the day for alphabetic phonics. But because of all that effort that my mother and father made, I really lived kind of the charm life. By high school, kids thought I was only making a joke or being funny when I'd say, well, I'm dyslexic. They didn't believe me. Because I'd been so well supported and, was taught the right ways to learn. And, I've always said dyslexia is just learning a different way. And so I've been very fortunate in that. But, it's also my greatest attribute because it taught me to believe in myself and be determined and how to get around things instead of giving up and things of that sort.
Wow. Well, I mean, a lot of people have stories just like you, and then there's some people that haven't been quite as fortunate. Like my brother has the similar story as you. My mom just went full on, like, no, we're going to get what he needs, and
right.
Let's get this taken care of. So, and now he's a dentist. I mean, it's not like, if the kids get what they need, then they can succeed to their full potential. I firmly believe that. So,
Yes.
so anyways, so what could you, go ahead. Sorry.
I've actually argued at times when I've gone and spoken to students in a dyslexic classroom. And one of the points that is very important to me that I always make to them is, look, do you know that you have to be smart enough to be in this room? And a lot of the kids don't understand what I'm getting at. And I've had a few teachers say, oh, no, you shouldn't say that. That's not entirely right. Well, it is right. If you aren't smart enough, we wouldn't be then providing diagnoses of dyslexia. There'd be some other diagnosis. And so I remind the kids every chance I get, you have the talent, the intellect, the ability to be successful. You have the ability to learn. You just learn in a different way. That's all there is to it. Mm-hmm. And that you can and will be successful provided the support you need.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's one of the biggest things that and the reason why we have this show is to make sure that we provide the right guidance and expertise out there, or bring in the right expertise for these parents to understand exactly what the school systems are supposed to be doing, and giving you the proper support. And then from the parent's perspective, how do you support a child that has a learning difference or disability? Mm-hmm. Because it's not like you were talking about your 3 older siblings. It's not the same as your
not easy
neurotypical child that learns correctly, or the normally.
And frankly, a good example is my own family. My youngest son, I have 2 boys. My youngest son is dyslexic and attention deficit and anxiety. But very similar with him is to me, is that, my wife, who is phenomenal and does a great job supporting him, but my wife in the beginning, the teachers had told her that he was average. And I like telling this story because it speaks to parents that, it's okay. And so she thought I was a prideful father who just didn't want to be told his son was average. And I said, honey, if he's average, that's okay. But I don't think he's average. And so she was not familiar with dyslexia. She had not dealt with that in her family or anything. So she didn't understand. And I said, honey, we just need to go get him tested. And if he's not dyslexic or there's nothing wrong and he's just average, great. But if he is, God forbid we don't go help him. Right. And so I love telling the story. We took him to Texas Children's as I went. And my wife left and had to go catch a plane, and calls me frustrated and says, those doctors all, acted like I'm just crazy and I'm this mother who thinks there's something wrong with her kid and he's just fine in the sense. I said, no, honey, they just didn't want to bias the test and those type things. But, she was spun up. So I love telling the story that when we got diagnosis, the doctor sits and says, well, his anxiety's through the roof. We've got to manage that before we can even address the dyslexia and what have you. And it really throws us back on our heels, particularly my wife, because she'd have no experience with it. And so when we were leaving, I look at her and I said, well, do you feel better? And she says, well, what do you mean? I said, well, there's plenty wrong with the little guy. They clearly don't think you're a crazy mom who's, playing helicopter mom. She doesn't entirely appreciate that. But the reality of it is, for parents who've had no experience with it, it's intimidating and it's horrifying. Mm-hmm. And we've got to help them know what resources are available. And most importantly, from the beginning, let them know you can help your child if you know what's going on. And you shouldn't fear the diagnosis. You shouldn't fear finding out whether there is a learning disability, whether it be dyslexia or otherwise, because the sooner you discover that, the more successful your child will be and the easier it will be for them and you to get them through their education and onto a very successful life.
It is so nice to hear you say that, because we always say that, but it's so nice to have the Speaker of the House
say somebody in your position in the government to say that, because I'm sure a lot of times we get so much pushback. Whether it's from the school system itself or from our representatives that truly don't understand what dyslexia is and why it's important to give that proper support to our children, and why we as parents, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. My senior in high school, I would go through a student council project. We would tutor and help kids in the elementary schools in reading. And I'm 47 years old, so senior in high school is a while ago. And I came back after the third session because I wanted to be careful about it. And quickly, I have a premise. A dyslexic can spot a dyslexic. We have that ability. And so I went back to my teacher, who was an English teacher, on top of it, and said, there's a young girl in the low reading group that I've worked with 3 weeks in a row in that group, and I'm telling you, she doesn't belong in that reading group. I think she's dyslexic. And the teacher told me that was terrible of me to say. And my point was, if we can diagnose her and help her, she'll be great. And if we don't, it could be very bad. Mm-hmm. But the teacher at that time did not understand or have that view and really took offense to my making such a suggestion.
To your point, when I go in and volunteer, like my youngest was in elementary school, so when I'd go in there and volunteer in the classroom, you're right, I could sit there and pick them out. Yep. And it's just, exactly what that child's going through because you went through it yourself, so you can see the telltale signs without having any testing. Now, that's not saying that you want to put dyslexics in the classroom to pick out the kids, but you definitely have to listen. And as far as the teachers go, you have to be willing to accept that, that child may be dyslexic and not just slow. And the testing or the evaluation is not a painful process or should not be a painful process. Therefore, that's the reason why it's in place. Let's utilize it.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like the labeling, I think a lot of teachers and parents are scared of, I call it a diagnosis because I'm from the medical field, but they can, but they feel like labeling is a bad thing. But if you have a diagnosis, then you know what to do with it. If you don't have the diagnosis, then
we're just going to keep
you're just
forward.
Lost in limbo, really.
Right. That's why I like to tell the story with my family, with my wife and I, with our youngest son, is that what horrified me was not having a diagnosis, because the diagnosis is empowering and it allows you to support your child and ensure their success. Not having the diagnosis is where you are setting that child up for failure. Totally. And I think if we can accomplish anything, it's getting parents to not be afraid of the diagnosis. And I don't want to be scary to people or frighten them, but if we could flip that and have it where people are actually more afraid of not having a diagnosis or not being clear on there isn't anything going on, it's this or it's that. That is what I want people to be more concerned about than going, oh gosh, I don't want to go get this diagnosis. I don't know. The sooner you get that diagnosis, the more successful you and your child are going to be on this journey. And you're going to look up and have an incredibly successful, very talented individual as an adult. And so it's getting people to realize you should desire the diagnosis as soon as you see any possibility of needing one.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the frustration and anxiety and depression and all of the other issues that come along with dyslexia, not even including the pipeline to prison aspect of it. We need to cut this off at the pass or as soon as we see it. And that's why we're excited that, Texas is, not finally, but, they have been doing a lot of improvements in how they deal with or remediate dyslexia. And we know that there's been a lot of legislation going on this last session. Can you give us kind of an update on what transpired during the legislative session this year?
Yes, absolutely. And I have to give tremendous credit and acknowledgement to Dan Huberty out of Humboldt, the chair of public education. He's also dyslexic. His son is dyslexic, who's in high school. And so Dan has been an extraordinary advocate in the area of dyslexia and beyond, frankly, for students across Texas. But he understands that journey. He was diagnosed. He's the opposite of me. I was diagnosed after kindergarten. He was diagnosed in college.
Oh, wow.
So he's pretty impressive. But What we did this session is, one, we did a broad overall school finance reform and added billions of dollars into school finance, which will make a difference across the board for Texas students and teachers and of course, parents. But specifically on dyslexia, Chairman Huberty was successful in doing some things that he's been working on for a while, which was increasing the financial weighted average for dyslexia, and adding more and additional dollars into dyslexia resources. And one of the most significant thing that we accomplished was, in doing that, we also created effectually, you could almost call it a grant or scholarship program, where dyslexic students, their parents, will now have resources from the local public school that they can use for tutors outside of the school, or if there's someone within the school, but allowing them the ability for support after school and otherwise in that student. You know, as a child growing up, I'll be candid, I hated it. I didn't like it. But every summer, at the end of summer, I would go to tutoring, and we would call it my tune-up. I'd go get my brain tuned up to get ready to go back to school. And so Chairman Huberty and many others working with him were able to successfully create the opportunity for parents to use those dollars to go do those type things for their student, which is so significant, because I think one of the things that frightens many parents from getting a diagnosis is that they're fearful of the resource that they would have to come up with. And so this session, we put a dent in providing those resources and helping them by providing greater resources to the school as a whole within their own operation and their support, and then providing more resource even to that parent beyond what's happening within that classroom day in and day out. And so that's a big deal, because I do think that's one of the biggest challenges many parents see, is that I'm afraid of this, and if I know it, I need to do something, but I'm not sure I have the resources to do what I need to do. So the state stepped up this session in providing even more resources to really try and support those students and those parents.
So let me ask you a question on that. So you talked about there was a significant increase in the weight for children who have dyslexia. Then there's another bucket of money for outside tutoring. This is not in lieu of what the school is supposed to be doing under
Not at
state
all.
law.
This is on top of.
On
This
top
is an
of.
addition.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
I would get a little bit in trouble, but you could almost call it somewhat of like a very lower level pilot program for almost like a voucher. Now, we don't want to refer it to as that, because it's not allowing them to go to some other private school or to a private school, wherever, but it's allowing them state dollars on top of to then go get the support with the tutoring and those type things.
We just want to make sure that it was clear that it's not something that,
It's not competing.
Yeah.
They're not. It's not.
Right.
We're not fighting over the same dollar. It's additional dollar.
Okay. Yeah. The parent, the school system isn't going to say, well, because you're getting these other funds over here, we're not going to provide services over
Not
here.
at all. Matter of fact, it's the opposite. The school system has more funds for dyslexia than they've ever had before, and even dollars on top of those to support that parent outside of the regular school day.
Awesome.
Now, are the schools going to be able to, is there, are they going to be able to spend the money where they feel fit, or are those dollars earmarked for dyslexia and those dyslexic children, and for intervention, not for
The answer is
Xerox
yes.
copies or something like that?
The answer is that the schools, this money is dyslexia money, period.
Okay.
So the schools had a great session. They got a whole lot of more money for a whole lot of things. And one of those specific things is increased weighted average for dyslexia money. That is, so the way I would put it is they have additional dollars for general things that they would want to do. And then specifically, they have more dollars for diagnosis, intervention, and support of a dyslexic student. And those dollars must be spent on the effort of working with that dyslexic student.
Awesome.
and those who need it.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Awesome. So how, we had someone that texted us today. I'm just going to throw this question. I don't know if it even makes sense, but, or if you could answer it, but she wrote and said, how is the Texas legislature going to make sure the districts implement the new laws? Because like as Stephen said earlier, historically that has been a struggle. Schools have reinterpreted the laws as they saw fit, or just not done it.
Right. No, that's a great question. And I don't want to get in the weeds, but I was in Austin earlier this week, and it's actually one of the things that we discussed. And, having Chairman Huberty as our chair of public education is very helpful in all of this, because it would be the Texas education agencies, along with the legislature's responsibility, to ensure that the schools are using not just these dollars, but all dollars as were intended. And so we will be focused on that. And one of the real focused discussions we had this week is that, and again, I'm going to get a little in the weeds and I apologize, but when we're not in session in Texas, we're in session for 5 months every odd numbered year. And then for 18 months, we're not in session, but our committees still meet and do interim charges. One of the things that we're going to do this session, this interim, is have our committees focused on ensuring that the agencies and the school districts are doing what we intended them to do with House Bill 3. So we're actually going to go lighter on having a listing of charges, looking at what we may do next session, not that we won't still look at and be preparing for that, but making sure when you pass such a significant transformative bill as House Bill 3, but having a focus continually that those things are being done as intended as we move forward. With that said, we will never be out of a scenario, whether it be general education issues or specifically dyslexia, where you have to have very vigilant parents like my mother, and now my wife, who are making certain that the school is doing what they are required to do in resources and otherwise to support the student. So I would never send the signal or the message to a parent, we've all got it handled, don't be vigilant and don't advocate for your child. But we will be ensuring to the best of our ability that they are doing this as we've requested. The education agency has that responsibility in their jurisdiction.
Okay.
Right. I mean, that's our tagline, being a partner in education.
Yeah.
It takes all of us. It takes the parents, it takes the school system itself, everybody at the campus level, on up, TEA, and as well as our legislative branches to make sure that we are getting the best possible resources to our children to help in their remediation.
Yeah, you can't just drop your kid off and say, see ya, and then
Right.
pick them up. You got to be an active role and then help them with homework after school. And
That's right.
It takes a lot of work to be a parent,
It takes a
It's
tremendous
not
amount.
easy. It's the hardest job on the planet.
It is,
So-
and I remind my wife of that almost every day, because in fairness to her, she's the one who is really dealing with those daily challenges that my mother had to deal with me, with our son. And I remind her every day, doing this and going through the struggle will all be worth it. And if we don't go through the struggle, we'll regret it.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I don't want to live life and look back and go, God, I regret not have pushed an extra inch. I don't want to live with regrets personally.
That's right.
Well,
Well, our
So-
greatest, it's our biggest responsibility, but it's also our greatest responsibility is taking care of our kids. And my father, I'll make it quick, but I tell the funny story of calling home and saying I got a job after college, and my mother, being as your mother would be, very loving and proud of me and praising. And she says, well, you want to talk to your dad? And I said, great. And my father says, well, I've succeeded. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I had a goal of raising 4 tax-paying citizens, and I've achieved my goal.
there you go.
And that is what we're trying to accomplish. But we want to be
Yes.
happy too.
Yes.
So, me and my wife, I'm dyslexic also. I was,
Right.
we're almost the same age. We're, a year apart. There wasn't any intervention when I was in school, unless
Correct.
you went to a specialty, Scottish Rite or something. There was one specialty school here in Dallas. But so I married the smartest person I could find but to help with everything else that I struggled with. And my wife was that, much like your wife, very good in school, excelled in school. And
Yes.
once we figured out that one of our children, we have 3 boys, 2 of them are dyslexic, but the first one we got identified, she had no idea how to help him. And
Right.
she turned around and looked at me and she's like, "This is on you. So you need to
Well-
help figure it out." And so that's why I became the advocate that I am now, understanding what this child is going through, and then understanding what he's going to need to be successful.
Well, and your story is similar to mine, and it's powerful because what is important is that, I mean, my wife's an attorney. She made it look easy, did great, all of that, but it scared her. The thought of even dealing with any of this scared her. And that's the thing that I do want us all to remember, because I get frustrated some of the time. I think that there are times when people say, well, that parent could do more. Why isn't the parent doing that? We have to remember that even highly intelligent, highly educated parents, this scares the hell out of them, and it
Absolutely.
intimidates them. And so we have to keep that in mind, because, my mother, just like you, I mean, there wasn't any real support back then. My mother would get a phone call from a different parent, sometimes the same parent, about the same time, a couple weeks in to the school year. And the parent would be saying, "What do I do? Tell me what you've done." Because they wouldn't have any idea what to do and they'd be scared. And so we have to remember that it isn't scary, but it is scary to those who are unfamiliar. And we have to keep that in mind, and we have to fix that understanding and support folks in that. And our wives are great examples, because my wife, and I'm certain your wife, would fight and bleed and cry and do whatever they have to support their children to be successful in any way. But yet this scared them, and it made it hard for them to move forward at times.
Absolutely.
So here's just a question off topic, but I was just curious. How did you get started in dyslexia, started in politics?
Honestly, dyslexia had a role in that, in the sense that my mother and father, and more so my mother, always had to advocate for me, and had to battle, as Stephen talks about. I mean, they're our moms and dads were the frontiersmen of this issue. And so, and I'm not trying to make fun of it, but, I tell people my oldest brother's a neurosurgeon, my second brother's a radiation oncologist, and my sister's a PhD geneticist. And they've all done incredibly well within those fields, which are not easy to do to begin with. And then there's Dennis. And so I was always interested in the advocacy. I was always interested in kind of the policy, and not simply dyslexia, but in general. And so I found that I excelled in more of the liberal arts, social sciences. And so I can remember I was, 7, 8 years old when Ronald Reagan was nominated for president in 1980. Well, I stayed up late with my mom and dad watching his nomination and those things. That was always just interesting to me. And so it's also the story of dyslexia. In high school, a lot of people, no one was ever negative or hard on me. I didn't have those stories as a lot of other kids did. But, sort of like the 3 Bonnen kids that are superstars and winning science fair, and then there's Dennis, and hopefully they'll all do so well, they'll take care of him, in later years. And I would point out, I said, I just didn't excel in the places people talked about. I won a national award for advertising. I won a state award for advertising, but no one really cared about that. And I don't mean it negatively. It just didn't register to people. And that's one of the things I think is tough for dyslexic kids, is that a lot of where we excel and a lot of where our talents are not what we focus on or make a big deal of from an academic perspective within our school system. I mean, we don't make a big deal of the kid who is incredibly talented in communication, particularly verbal communication. That's actually the annoying kid in the class. Believe me, I was him. But that's one of the things that I think is a challenge that dyslexic kids have to go through, is that in many of the places that we excel, they're not as clearly definable in the classroom or academically as it is for other kids. And so I actually did quite successfully in many ways, but it just wasn't the normal way. It wasn't the science fair way. And so I found the political and really more the policy very interesting. And my parents had raised me to be an advocate and had raised me to be a part of your community. And growing up in small towns, we were always involved and engaged. And so the opportunity to run opened up. It was an open position. And so I just wanted to run and support the community. And so it's because of the home I was raised in that I was willing and able to go do that.
You know,
And then it just went on from there. I mean,
Yes.
because 20 years,
Yes.
that's a
It's a long
good
time.
career. I mean, you know, of working for the great people of Texas, you know, so.
So
Yes.
you talked about strengths, and you know, I look at dyslexia as we have strengths and we have weaknesses, and generally, if we're talking about dyslexia, our strengths are magnified. We constantly are using those strengths area that ends up looking like it's a superpower, or that's where they really excel at. So my goal is to make sure that we get our weaknesses to as close as possible to our strengths, therefore making a whole student that can be very successful.
Yeah, because you have to read in this world. You have to read and write in this world. I mean, you just have to.
It's funny for you to say that, Stephen, because that's my exact view. And I tell kids when I talk to them, I said, let me tell you something. Your being dyslexic is a gift because you have greater skills, greater talents, and greater strengths than other kids in other areas. You just have to learn what they are and take advantage of them and use them to help you be successful where you're weak. And you will use those. I mean, in college, I joke about it, in college, one of my best friends today is because he took pity on me when no one else would. I learned that if I went and sat in the classroom and I listened to the professors, I couldn't take any notes. Because if I take notes, I wouldn't have very good notes and I wouldn't hear what was said. And so I just sat and listened. And so other students would be a little unhappy with me at the end of the semester when I'd want to review notes, and they go, well, hey, punk, you should have taken some notes, you know? They didn't understand, and they weren't ever that mean. But a friend of mine kind of said, you know what? Yeah, I'll share the notes. And guess what they learned? And I'm not making this up or exaggerating it. Almost all of my finals would have multiple choice and then some essay questions. What they learned is if there were 2 or 3 essay questions, I could tell them, here are the 3 or 4 essay questions we're going to be asked, and I was always right because I had used that super talent of mine of listening to the professor, and I could tell what was of greatest importance to that professor, and I could predict with almost perfect accuracy what the essay questions were going to be. So he and I made a great partnership because he'd allow me to review his notes and he'd talk through them with me, and I'd tell him what the essay questions were going to be because I used that talent to help me.
Yeah, my teachers used to get so angry at me because I would never open a book. I would sit there and listen to them, and I could ace their test every time. They're like, how are you doing that? You must be cheating. I don't understand. And they would get very frustrated at me because I sat there and listened. However, I will say this, where I look at dyslexia as a disability, because if I go to fill out an application and I can't read and write, that's where the disability comes in, because I can't get a job. I can't provide or be that taxpayer. So that's why we fight so hard to make sure that we remediate as much as possible.
Because we want, like your dad, we want as many taxpayers in the great state of Texas as possible, right? It helps our communities if you can learn how to read.
It does. And let me make a point to that. I mean, I have to explain to people who work with me and for me and around me that, look, I'm very verbal and I can read and I can write. But if I can call you and answer your question, it takes me no time. If I have to type an email or text messages are horrifying for me because I could take an hour to do a text message response to somebody because it's difficult. I can do it, but it's difficult. And so it is a disability because it's something that you're always having to balance and manage throughout life. And, you know, and even to this day at 47 years old and having had success in life, I'm still nervous and still anxious when I am having to write something and send it out. And so, yeah, it is a challenge, but the great gift of dyslexia is you learn to overcome. I mean, I tell my wife, our oldest son is incredibly bright and incredibly talented. And I tell her I'm more worried about his success than our younger son because he hasn't hit a roadblock yet.
He hasn't struggled
hit a
yet.
speed bump. Yeah. My younger son, Gregory, look, as I tell him, my older son walks up to a brick wall and he goes, well, there's a brick wall here. I guess I'll go sit down. My younger son says, all right, well, I'm going to climb over it. I'm going to run around it, or I'm going to run through it, because you have to learn that as a dyslexic.
Yeah, you find a
so
way.
there are gifts in all of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so this is a tough question. Well, I think it is, just because I kind of lived through it. So, so here goes. So, you're familiar with the 8.5 cap. So that was placed on special education from 2004 to 2017, and it really had a negative impact on our state. The majority of the students that were denied services during that time were dyslexics.
Right.
My child was one that was initially denied testing and then services. Do you feel Texas is making improvements? I know you guys passed a lot of laws. Do you feel that Texas and the TEA are making the improvements necessary to move forward in a positive direction? And if so, how? How are we moving on from that big, negative
Yes.
that our state endured?
We are improving. There is more need for improvement, but I'll give you a little bit of information. Recently, the U.S. Department of Education has moved Texas from needs intervention to needs assistance. So we've stepped forward. We have not stepped to where we need to be, but we at least are showing progress. Texas' new strategic plan improvements will continue to improve this status with the U.S. Education Department. TA developed 10 support and technical assistant networks to provide direct technical assistance to local school districts, including targeted professional development for our teachers, because I think that was one of the challenges, is the teachers didn't have the professional development to understand and recognize some of these issues. TA completely revamped the monitoring system for special education, and it will be fully implemented this coming fall. Some implementation already has occurred, but it'll be fully done this fall. TA also reorganized and created an Office of Special Populations to prioritize services to the students with disabilities. A recent letter from the U.S. Department of Education confirms that Texas has taken steps forward. And for the first time since 2012, Texas has no uncorrected, long-standing non-compliance. And to date, TA has corrected all findings from the U.S. Department of Education as of January of this year, of 2019. So there is still work to be done. There's still improvement to be made, but significant improvements have also been made. And the best thing about those significant improvements is that it's all part of a strategic plan and roadmap that we had to get approval from the U.S. Department of Education and sign off on, and it is being executed, and we will continue on that path.
Excellent. Excellent.
I'm glad to hear that we've taken those steps and that we are moving forward.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, it's embarrassing to have been in the position we were in.
Do you know, and this is my question for everybody to come up to that may have the answer, and I don't know if you have the answer or not, but, just for the sake of history, and not repeating history, do you even know why the cap was put there in the first place? Because I know every state has a cap, and we were right there with the national average of like 11 to 12% identified, and for the state to strategically go down to 8.5 or lower is hard for my little brain.
Right.
Hard
Hard
for
to
my brain.
understand.
It's just so mean. It's mean, and I don't understand why we did it. Do you know why? Because I don't want us to repeat history.
Personally, I do not know why, and I think you actually asked a great question. That's something that I need to go find out, because if you don't know why you did something, you're exactly right. You can't ensure that the mistake is not made again in the future.
Right. It's just so, I think, imperative that we don't do that again, because it hurt a lot of kids.
Well, I'm glad.
Absolutely.
I'm glad that we have people like you and
Oh.
Dan Huberty in positions that is going to not only make sure that there's laws in place to protect our kids, and that have a number one, a personal and relationship with dyslexia,
I mean,
and
the fact-
understand what we're going through
Yeah.
and why we need this remediation, that it's not just simply turning your B's and D's around backwards. There's a
Right.
whole plethora of stuff that goes on with a child that has dyslexia. So
The fact that you guys, you and Representative Huberty, are even saying the word dyslexia and talking about it as your own personal thing that you went through and that your family went through, because it doesn't just affect the student, it affects the whole family.
Right.
That you guys are talking about it, and that in itself is huge, so we really appreciate you coming on the show and doing this interview with us, and we appreciate everything that you guys are doing.
can't thank you enough.
I appreciate the invitation. I think it's important we talk about it.
Yeah, okay, well, good. Well, hopefully we'll have you back on. Do you see, I know we're about to wrap it up, but do you see any new legislation on the horizon? I know you just got out of session and you probably don't even want to talk about new bills, but is there anything rolling down the pipes that you know of?
It's still too early.
Yeah.
We're all digesting, recovering, and
I
I'll be
bet.
candid. I'll go back to the discussion we had a few minutes ago. The greatest priority to me right now from dyslexia and education is ensuring that the good work that we just did gets implemented properly and is done correctly.
That is a hard job in and of itself. So I applaud you guys. And if there's anything that we can do or parents at home can do to help implement the plan, or to make, or teachers, or I don't know, do you have any advice for us to help?
No, I mean, it is really to be vigilant and know what's coming, know the opportunities that are there, which we've discussed a bit today, and just make sure that local school districts, because at the end of the day, the local school districts have significant authority here. They're required to do these things, but it's after the fact that you find out. So I think it's important that you're having a positive conversation with your local school boards, school board members, and superintendents and administrators to make sure that they are implementing things to the advantage, as is intended by the legislation, to the dyslexic student.
It's that
Right.
empowering these parents to understand how to be
An advocate.
an advocate and be a
Right.
partner in education. So anything
That's
that
right.
we can do to help y'all, please let us know.
We
and
will.
We'll definitely pass that information along.
We would love to.
So thank you very
Right.
much for joining us today.
Yeah, we do.
Thank you.
appreciate
Thanks
it.
for the opportunity.
Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Have a restful rest of your summer.
Thank you.
All right, I know you've worked hard. Okay, so like we always like to say at the end of our show, if you think there's something that's not quite right with your child, your son or daughter or student, please go to our website and empowerdyslexia.info. And we have letter templates that you can fill out and then hand over to your school counselor and get your son or daughter tested. Look for a full evaluation. If you suspect dyslexia, don't forget about ADHD, like we mentioned in past episodes, because that kind of runs together sometimes. Or dysgraphia, have them do a full eval, and you'll be glad that you did. You'll be glad that you did, because then you'll have an idea of what's going on. And when you have an idea of what's going on, you're going to be able to match the right intervention for your child and help the school do that. Okay, we'll see you this time next week.
See you there.
Bye.